Today, we're thrilled to release a new survey titled Parenting in the Age of Digital Technology, and you should all have a copy in the packets that you received downstairs. And it's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Vicky Rideout from VJR Consulting, who directed the survey and organized today's conference with us. Vicky is a longtime media researcher who founded the Children in Media program at Children Now and also at the Kaiser Family Foundation. And indeed, for those of you who used to come to her conferences on Children in Media, you'll recognize that this one is organized in very much the same way. She also organized the Kaiser Family Foundation's program for the study of media and health. Today, Vicky's going to present some of the highlights from the research project, so please join me in welcoming Vicky Rideout.
Good morning, and thank you. It's so good to see everybody. So my job is to tell you a little bit about the findings from this study that Northwestern conducted. And I'll start with just a little bit of background for you. First up, the methodology. This was a nationally representative survey of more than 2,300 parents with children ages 8 and under. And it's going to be important to keep in mind that this was a survey of parents of young children, because I think with some of the findings we're going to think, well, if this was a survey of parents of tweens or teens, the results might have looked a little bit different. We don't know, but it's important to keep that in mind as we go through these findings. And then the only other point I would make is that it was an online survey. Unlike most online surveys, this one used what's called a probability sample rather than what's referred to as a convenience sample or an opt-in sample. And what this means is that survey participants are recruited to the survey using very reliable methodologies like random digit dial telephone surveys or address-based sampling. And that means we get much more accurate findings. And the other thing that they do with this particular company is that those who get recruited to participate who aren't already online are given a notebook computer and internet access, so that we are doing the best job we possibly can of representing the non-online population. So taking a look at, just to start with, what's the family media environment in the home and looking at the new types of media, we find that the penetration of smartphones at this point is pretty high. It's 71%, and 42% of families who say they own a tablet. This is pretty rapid adoption for both of these technologies. You will find different surveys coming up with different responses in terms of the percent with smartphones, so I'll just tell you how we defined it for people to answer for themselves. We said it was a cell phone that can be used to send email, watch videos, download apps, and access the internet, like an iPhone, Galaxy, or Droid. And so 71% of parents say there is at least one of those in their household, parents with kids age 8 and under. Now, I don't have a slide for this, but it's important to know that those rates of ownership do vary a lot by income. So for smartphones, the penetration is pretty high with smartphones. So it ranged from 60% among our lowest income group up to 80% among the highest income group. And those were, the low income group was under $25,000 a year family income, and the higher income group was over $100,000 a year. For tablets, the gap is even bigger. It's 19% penetration among the lowest income group and 65% among the highest income group. So this is important if we're preparing educational content for young people. We want it to reach those most at risk. We have to remember the limitations that still exist in these new technologies. So we wanted to start this research by just trying to figure out, big picture, where does kids media use fit in the pantheon of things that parents are concerned about and the stuff that they have to worry about every day. So we started out by asking parents how concerned they were about each of these issues that you see on the screen with regard to this particular child they were responding about in this survey. And this is the percent here who would say they are very concerned about each of these different issues. And I take it as kind of good news that you don't see a whole lot of parents who are very concerned about really any of these items, so I think that's kind of reassuring. Of course, it's not surprising to see health and safety at the top of the list. And for this particular young age group, it's interesting to see that social skills and behavior are more of an issue than academic skills. Continuing down the list, I'm going to page 2 now of issues. You find media use pretty far down, at least when it comes to the percent of parents who say they are very concerned about this issue. So now I'm going to add in the somewhat, and you'll see that it changes a little bit. Media use has moved up to about 1/3 of parents who say they are at least somewhat concerned about that issue. And fitness and nutrition pops way up there as a concern along with health and safety. The next chart shows that most families are not experiencing a lot of conflicts about media. And this was something that kind of surprised us because we do sort of hear anecdotes about families constantly struggling, kids wanting more and more time with media, the parents constantly pulling on the reins, or fights or battles and trying to find ways to avoid the battles. And so again, at least among families with young children, we don't find that many parents feel that there are a lot of conflicts. Now, it may well be that their kids' media use is pretty benign at these young ages, and they may feel differently about it when their kids are tweens and teens, but at this point it's not a big issue for most families. For some families, using media together is a favorite family activity, as you can see in this chart. So we asked people, what are the activities that your family enjoys doing together a lot? Now, this doesn't mean that these various activities are what they're actually doing most frequently, but it's what they enjoy doing most. I was interested to see that cooking and eating meals together and doing things outside together are at the top of the list of what at least parents want to do and enjoy doing with their families. So watching TV and movies at home together is something that about 40% of families say they enjoy doing together a lot. But when it comes to using the other types of media, like playing video games together or whatnot, those just don't make it very high up the list for most families. So related to that issue is the issue of parental co-viewing or co-engagement with media with their young kids. This slide shows you how often parents are using TV, computers, video games, and mobile devices with their young kids. And I don't know how to characterize whether this is a lot or a little, but this is the percent who say they do this activity with their child all or most of the time that the child is watching TV, the parent is watching with them, and so on. What I do find really interesting here is to see how substantially that co-viewing and co-engagement drops as soon as a kid reaches even the slightly older age of 6 to 8 years old. So it's clearly something that, to the degree it is happening with those 2 to 5-year-olds, not as much nearly with the 6 to 8-year-olds. So the next section of the survey looked at a series of common scenarios in families' lives. Situations where some families turn to media as a parenting tool. So we asked about what parents do to keep children occupied when they need to get things done around the house, when they're out at a restaurant, when they need to calm down a child who's having a temper tantrum, when they want to reward a child with a treat or give them a consequence for bad behavior, or when they're getting the child ready for bed. And you can find all of those different results in the report. I'm just showing you one here as an example. Now, in general, what was interesting in those findings is that parents say they are very likely or more likely to choose other tools to use with their kids in these situations rather than media, books, toys, other types of activities. When it comes to media, they say they are much more likely to use television than they are to use newer mobile devices like a smartphone or a tablet. And these results here for a handheld game or smartphone or tablet are only among those parents who actually own those devices, which is a limited percent of parents. So it's actually much smaller proportion of families where that's really happening out there in the real world. Another topic that we explored is the role of media in getting children ready for bed. And I don't know, this is just a personal interest of mine to see how bedtime is kind of changing with new media for kids. So this is the percent of parents who say they are very likely to turn to one of these tools when they're getting their child ready for bed. So you can see it's a pretty low percentage. It's 13% who say they're very likely to use TV or DVDs when they're getting their child ready for bed. And it's about half of parents, a little more, who say they're very likely to use a book. But when you expand it again to the somewhats, you do find about 1/3 of parents who say they are at least somewhat likely to use TV when they're getting their child ready for bed. So all of this is what leads us to conclude that the so-called new media devices, while they're obviously become much more widespread, they still haven't really changed parenting and family life, at least among families with young children, to the degree that I think we expected when we went into this survey. media aren't much of a concern for parents this age, but neither do most parents think that new media devices like smartphones and iPads and so on have made parenting any easier. Finally, I want to turn to what I personally found most interesting in this survey. We've known for some time that certain choices that parents make about media in the home are very related to the amount of time that kids in those families spend using media. So for example, putting a TV in the child's bedroom or leaving the TV on in the background whether anybody's watching it or not. What I think we didn't realize until now is the degree to which it is these parental decisions that seem to be driving media use in the home. The standard paradigm, as Ellen mentioned before, is kids demand more and more time with media. Parents are scrambling to try to monitor their kids' media use, to moderate it, to hold on the reins. That's not what the data from this study show us. When we looked at it, we saw something very different. We saw a picture of parents making a whole constellation of different decisions about TV in the bedroom, yes, TV on in the background, yes, but also what are the activities our family is going to engage in, when am I going to turn to media in all of these different parenting scenarios, whether it's getting the child ready for bed, when I need to calm them down, when I need to keep them occupied, and it's what the parent does themselves in terms of their own screen media use. All of these constellation of decisions are creating what is in effect a family media ecology within the home, and that is what is driving the children's media use. So families are either oriented towards screen media use or not. And so that's what I think was one of the things that really stood out for me here. We identified 3 broad categories of parenting styles and family media environments, and we called them media-centric, media-moderate, and media-light. About 4 in 10 families fall into the media-centric category. These parents are screen media enthusiasts themselves. They consume an average of 11 hours a day of screen media at home. Now, they may be doing more than one of those screen media at the same time, but it's still quite a bit. It's more than 3 hours of television and of computers each. Half of them say the TV is on most of the time in their home. Nearly half have a TV in their young children's bedroom. Watching TV together is one of their favorite family activities. These parents are more likely to turn to TV and other media in those parenting scenarios that we talked about. 42% of them say they're very or somewhat likely to use television when they're getting their child ready for bed. All of these different choices and approaches come together to create a family media environment that we call media-centric. And children in those families, who are age 8 or younger, spend an average of 4 hours and 40 minutes a day with screen media. Another 4 in 10 families fall into what we call the media-moderate group, where the media-centric parents consume 11 hours a day of screen media. These parents consume just under 5 hours a day. They're less likely to have TVs in their children's bedrooms or to leave the TV on all the time. They're a lot less likely to list watching TV and movies together at home as one of their favorite activities. And the kids in these families consume just under 3 hours a day of screen media compared to just under 5 hours a day in the media-centric homes. So you might notice by now we've already taken up about 85% of families. So it's a lot of families with young kids who are in the media. We call it moderate. You know, that's a value judgment to some degree. Really the accurate title is average. This is what the average is. There is finally this much smaller group of parents and families that we call media-light parenting. This is only 16% of families that fall into this group. These are the families that just don't seem to be very oriented towards screens or that are making very conscious efforts to have some kind of balance in the home and to set different guidelines for their children's media use. They have created family media ecologies that are much less oriented towards screen media. These parents themselves spend a lot less time with screen media, about 1 hour and 45 minutes a day. So these are parents who watch about 1 hour of television a day. They use the computer for about a half an hour. They use their smartphone or their iPad for 10, 15 minutes, something like that. Their children end up spending about 1 hour and a half a day with screen media, so much less. So there are significant demographic differences in these groups of parents. You can see here there's a big, fairly significant difference by income. This is the median income. It ranges from $48,000 a year in the media-centric families up to $74,000 a year in the media-light families. There are also differences in terms of the media-centric families are more likely to be single-parent families, which makes some sense. There are some differences in education as well and socioeconomic status. But as I interpret these data anyway, and this is one of the things that'll be interesting to talk about in our discussion today, I think we're seeing something that is not just a story of socioeconomic status. There are families from all walks of life in each of these different parenting groups. So there are higher income, more highly educated parents who are in the media-centric group. There are parents from all different, very similar, parents are creating similar media ecologies who are from very different types of socioeconomic groups. So I think economics plays a huge role, a big role, I really do. And I think the limited options perhaps that families with less income have obviously has a lot to do with enjoying watching television and movies at home together as a favorite family activity and so on. But I also think that there is a generational shift going on here, that there are a lot more parents now who enjoy media themselves, who have grown up with a lot of media themselves and now enjoy it. They're not that concerned about their children's media use. They don't attribute that many negative effects to media use, particularly among young children. They're not struggling with their kids over media. And they have created family media ecologies that are oriented towards screen media. Not necessarily the new media that we thought were going to be dominating these families' lives, but towards screen media nonetheless. Now, these are just some of the highlights from the study, but I want to draw your attention to a number of other things that I think that you're going to be interested in, and especially, I would say, on pages 20 to 22 of the report, we have a bunch of detailed tables in here that go into detail about parents' attitudes, about the educational benefits of each of these different types of media. So you can see the percent of parents who think television, computers, video games, mobile have a positive versus a negative impact on children's reading skills, their math, their speaking skills, their attention span, their creativity. And on the next pages you can see the same data on social skills, behavior, physical activity, and sleep. And so it's very interesting. I think a lot of folks here will want to know how video games compare and where parents think issues are as far as attention span or creativity and so on. So I do encourage you, don't just stick with my little summary here. Do delve into the report. And that is it for me, and I will now turn it back over to Ellen.
Thank you, Vicky.